The limestone valley held its breath. For 3 hours. Cooper hadn't moved, not when the buzzards circled overhead, not when the desert wind whipped sand across his graying muzzle. The 14-year-old retriever lay pressed against the earth, his arthritic body curved around a jagged crevice in the Spanish Badlands. Samuel Hawthorne found his dog there, doing something impossible, singing. Not barking, not whining. A low, rhythmic humming that seemed to rise from somewhere deeper than throat or chest, a sound Samuel had never heard in 40 years of working with animals. Cooper, what the hell? Then he heard it. From 15 feet below, a weak, desperate answer. Not a bark in return, but something that made Samuel's blood run cold. The unmistakable cry of a lion cub, trapped and dying. Cooper's clouded eyes met his master's. The message was clear. We're not leaving. The question was why an old dog would risk everything for a predator's young. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Samuel Hawthorne never imagined he'd end his days in the scorched hills of southern Spain, 20 miles from the nearest town where English was nothing but a tourist's echo. But promises to dying wives have a way of redrawing life's map, and Eleanor had been specific in her final months. Somewhere quiet. Sam. Somewhere you can finally stop running from that old ghost. That ghost had a face, a pregnant lioness he'd shot by mistake in a California preserve back in 1984. Clean kill, they'd called it. Necessary error. But 40 years hadn't dulled the image of her eyes as the light left them, or the way her body had curved protectively around her unborn cubs even in death. At 75, Sam was all sharp angles and weathered leather, his body carved down to essentials by grief and time. 3 years since Eleanor's pancreatic cancer won its swift battle. 3 years of conversations with no one but Cooper, the arthritic golden retriever who'd outlived his own expiration date through pure stubbornness. Cooper had been magnificent, once a search and rescue dog who'd pulled 17 people from various disasters before retirement. Now he walked like Sam felt, each step a negotiation with pain, each morning a small victory against time. The vet in town had diagnosed a heart murmur 6 months back, suggested making him comfortable, but comfort wasn't in Cooper's vocabulary. 10 years ago, he'd lost his only puppy in a mine collapse during a rescue attempt. Since then, he'd appointed himself guardian to every vulnerable creature he encountered, from field mice to feral cats. The conservation area stretched for miles around Sam's converted farmhouse, a controversial experiment in rewilding that had the locals spitting anger into their morning coffee. The Iberian Wildlife Project had reintroduced species long absent from these hills, including a small pride of African lions. It was madness, the farmers said. Ecological colonialism, the newspapers argued. Sam stayed out of it, walking Cooper in the early morning when the land was theirs alone. But tensions had escalated recently. 2 livestock attacks in 3 months had the town demanding blood. Marcus Thompson, whose father had served with Sam in the Forest Service, had warned him just last week. They're looking for any excuse to shut it down. Sam, 1 dead tourist, 1 mauled child, hell, even 1 more sheep, and those lions are finished. Now, staring down at Cooper's impossible vigil over a dying predator's cub, Sam felt the weight of every one of his 75 years pressing down like the Spanish sun. The morning had started like every other since Eleanor died, coffee at dawn, pills for Cooper's arthritis, then the slow walk through the limestone valleys before the heat made movement unbearable. Sam kept to established paths, avoiding the areas where the Conservation Project had posted warning signs about wildlife activity. At 7 in the morning, the world belonged to them alone, or so he'd thought. Cooper's sudden bolt shattered the routine. The old dog hadn't run in 2 years. Yet there he went, arthritis forgotten, limping at speed toward a cluster of weathered rocks 50 yards off the trail. Sam's heart clenched. Dogs sometimes knew when their time came, seeking solitude for the end. His hands shook as he followed. Cooper, easy, boy, please. But Cooper wasn't dying. He was intensely, vibrantly alive in a way Sam hadn't seen since before the mine collapse. The retriever had positioned himself beside a natural crevice in the limestone, a jagged wound in the earth maybe 18 inches wide at the surface. As Sam approached, Cooper did something that defied 14 years of living together. He began making sounds Sam had never heard from any dog. Low, rhythmic, almost musical, like a mother humming to a child. If mothers weighed 80 pounds and had golden fur, the response came from below. Weak, desperate, but unmistakably feline. Sam dropped to his knees, angling his phone's flashlight into the darkness. 15 feet down, twisted in what looked like old poacher's wire, was a lion cub, 3 months old at most, ribs showing through tawny fur, left hind leg bent at an unnatural angle. Jesus Christ. The cub lifted its head toward the light, eyes glazed with dehydration. 2 days without water in this heat, maybe 3. The wire had cut deep into the flesh above the paw, and flies were already circling. This was how nature worked, brutal, indifferent. Sam should call Marcus, report it, let the conservation team handle it. That was the law. That was the reasonable response. Cooper hadn't moved, hadn't stopped his strange maternal humming. The cub was responding, its breathing beginning to match the rhythm of Cooper's sounds. Synchronizing. Sam had seen this behavior once before, years ago, when Cooper found that injured fawn, but never with a predator. The internal war lasted maybe 30 seconds. The law said report immediately. Any intervention without authorization could result in criminal charges, wildlife interference, destroying evidence of poaching activity, endangering the reintroduction program. At 75, a criminal record meant losing his pension, maybe deportation. Marcus would have no choice but to arrest him. But there was older law at work here, the kind written in Cooper's clouded eyes and the cub's labored breathing, the kind that said you don't walk away from suffering you can prevent. Eleanor would have called it divine law. Sam just called it being human. Damn it to hell. He tried first with his belt, fashioning a crude loop and lowering it down. The cub was too weak to resist, but also too weak to help. The wire trap had wedged against a root system, preventing any simple lift. He needed rope, water, proper tools. Cooper whined when Sam stood to leave. I'm coming back. You hear me? Both of you. The 20-minute drive to the farmhouse felt like hours. Sam loaded his truck with everything he could think of, climbing rope from his ranger days, water bottles, wire cutters, headlamps, even Cooper's old rescue harness. His hands moved with muscle memory from 40 years of emergency responses, even as his mind screamed warnings about what he was about to do. When he returned, Cooper hadn't moved an inch. The cub was still alive but weaker, its cries barely audible now. Sam rigged an anchor point around a solid boulder, tested the rope. His first descent attempt failed. The crevice narrowed at 8 feet, too tight for his shoulders. The second attempt, approaching from a different angle, got him close enough to lower water in a modified bottle. The cub drank desperately, Cooper encouraging from above with soft woofs. But extraction was impossible alone. The wire was tangled in roots and rock, the cub too injured to climb even if freed, the space too narrow for Sam to fully reach. He sat back, sweat streaming, considering options that grew darker as the sun climbed higher. The cub wouldn't last another day. Cooper seemed to understand, pressing closer to the edge, maintaining his vigil with heartbreaking determination. The afternoon sun turned the limestone valley into a furnace. Sam worked methodically, setting up a shade cloth over the crevice while Cooper maintained his position, panting heavily but refusing water. The old dog's dedication bordered on obsession, and Sam began to worry about heat stroke adding to their problems. It was while securing a new anchor point that Sam noticed the first print, large, unmistakably feline, pressed into a sandy patch 20 yards from the crevice. Fresh, maybe 6 hours old. His ranger instincts kicked in immediately, and he began reading the story written in disturbed earth and broken twigs. The mother had been here, multiple times. Sam followed the trail carefully, Cooper watching but not moving from his post. The prints circled the crevice in increasingly desperate patterns. Here, deep claw marks on a tree trunk. There, a depression where she'd lain, watching, waiting. The trail led up a small rise to a cluster of acacia trees, and that's where Sam found them, two small mounds of recently disturbed earth, each no bigger than a shoebox. He didn't need to dig to know what lay beneath. The size matched the cub below perfectly, siblings that hadn't survived the drought that had gripped the region for 3 months. The mother had buried them with the same instinctive care that cats, wild and domestic, showed their dead young. Sam removed his hat, stood there for a moment in the crushing heat, thinking about small graves and mourning mothers. Cooper's sudden bark pulled him back. Not an alarm, something else. The old retriever had risen, tail wagging weakly, nose pointing toward the eastern ridge. Sam grabbed his binoculars, scanned the horizon, and felt his blood turn to ice water. She was watching them. The lioness stood on an outcropping 200 yards away, motionless except for the tail that twitched with predatory interest. Even at this distance, Sam could see she was magnificent and damaged. Her left shoulder sat lower than the right, and when she shifted position, the limp was obvious. An old injury. The way she'd adapted to it, compensated for it. But it was the collar that made Sam's hands shake. Conservation project animals wore GPS collars with identification numbers visible through binoculars. This lioness wore number 27. Sam knew that number. He'd read it in the project documentation Marcus had shared. Remembered it because Eleanor had circled it in the newspaper article about the reintroduction ceremony she'd attended just before her diagnosis. Lioness 27 had a history that the project celebrated as triumph over tragedy. Orphaned as a cub when her pregnant mother was shot in a California preserve, raised in captivity, selected for the Spanish reintroduction as a symbol of conservation success. The article had included a photo of Eleanor at the release ceremony, standing near the transport cages, her face bright with the passion that had defined her final year. The math was simple and devastating. The California Preserve, 1984. A pregnant lioness, shot by mistake. Cubs delivered posthumously. One surviving. That survivor, through the strange circulation of captive breeding programs, had ended up here, in these Spanish hills where Sam had fled to escape his guilt. And now her cub was dying in a hole while she watched, prevented by injury and human presence from saving it. Cooper did something extraordinary then. The old dog rose, walked 10 feet from the crevice toward the lioness, and sat down. Then he walked back, his scent creating an invisible trail. He repeated this 3 times, each journey taking visible toll on his arthritic joints, before returning to his vigil position. The message couldn't have been clearer if he'd spoken English. Your baby is here. I'm trying to help. The lioness Sam found himself thinking of her as Serenity, though he couldn't remember if that was official name or his invention. Took 5 steps down from her perch, 5 steps closer, then stopped. Her eyes never left Sam. He was the barrier, the threat that kept her from her last surviving cub. Sam set down his tools, moved slowly backward until he was 50 yards from the crevice. Cooper whined but stayed in position. Serenity advanced another 10 yards. This dance continued for an hour, Sam retreating, the mother approaching, Cooper holding the middle ground like a referee in the world's strangest negotiation. By 4 in the afternoon, Serenity had closed to within 60 yards of the crevice, close enough that Sam could see the details of her injury, old scar tissue around the shoulder, the way she held the leg, gunshot wound, poorly healed. She'd adapted, survived, even bred successfully, but she couldn't navigate the narrow crevice with that shoulder, couldn't pull her cub free even if she reached it. Sam made a decision that would have cost him his ranger's license back in the States. He opened his pack, pulled out the ham sandwich he'd brought for lunch, and tossed half of it halfway between himself and the lioness. Not to feed her fed lions were dead lions in conservation terms, but to communicate, to show intent. Serenity ignored the sandwich but understood the gesture. She lay down, sphinx-like, watching, waiting, trusting, or at least tolerating, the strange partnership between an old man, an older dog, and her dying cub. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Sam worked on widening the crevice opening. Every stone he moved, every root he cut, he explained aloud to both Cooper and the watching mother. Just making room. Need to get equipment down there. Not hurting him, see? His voice carried across the still air, and whether or not Serenity understood the words, she seemed to grasp the intent. Cooper had shifted his position slightly, now lying with his head actually inside the crevice opening. Sam could hear him still making those maternal sounds, and amazingly, hear the cub responding. Weak but rhythmic, like a conversation in a language older than words. The controversial part, the part that would have Marcus threatening arrest, was what Sam did next. He took his shirt, soaked it in water, and lowered it down to the cub, let his scent mix with the water, with Cooper's scent already thick in the confined space, creating a bridge of smell that said, friend, not foe. It was the opposite of every protocol, every safety regulation, every principle of maintaining wild animals' fear of humans. But those protocols hadn't anticipated this lion cub whose grandmother Sam had killed, whose mother bore wounds from human violence, whose siblings lay buried in small graves nearby. The circularity of it felt like fate, or Eleanor's God, or just the universe's dark sense of humor. As 6 o'clock approached and shadows began to lengthen, Sam had managed to widen the opening by perhaps 4 inches. Not enough for extraction, but enough that Cooper could lower his entire head and neck into the space. The old dog was exhausted, dehydrated, his heart murmur audible even from several feet away. But he wouldn't stop his vigil, wouldn't cease his strange lullaby to the trapped cub. Serenity had risen, pacing now in shortening arcs. Night was coming. In the wild, night meant hyenas, wild dogs, opportunistic predators that wouldn't hesitate to take a trapped cub. She knew it. Sam knew it. Even Cooper seemed to understand that darkness would bring new dangers. Sam made the choice that would define everything that followed. He would stay the night, set up camp, maintain a fire to keep scavengers away. And somehow, he didn't know how yet, get that cub out before another dawn broke over these unforgiving hills. The decision to stay through the night transformed the rescue from impulse to commitment. Sam drove back to the farmhouse once more, loading his truck with camping gear he hadn't used since Eleanor's death tent, sleeping bag, battery-powered lights, and most importantly, Cooper's heart medication that the dog had refused to take that morning. He also grabbed the old radio Eleanor had kept in the kitchen, thinking that human voices might keep scavengers at bay. By the time he returned, the sun was kissing the horizon, painting the limestone cliffs in shades of amber and blood. Cooper hadn't moved, though his breathing was labored, sides heaving with exhaustion. Serenity had advanced to 40 yards from the crevice, close enough that Sam could see her eyes tracking his every movement as he set up camp. He positioned himself deliberately 100 yards from the crevice, creating a triangle with himself, Cooper and the cub, and the watching mother. The tent went up quickly, muscle memory from decades of wilderness work. Sam built a fire ring from loose stones, gathering deadwood while there was still light. Every action was slow, deliberate, telegraphed for the lioness's benefit. "Just making camp," he said aloud, maintaining the running commentary that seemed to settle her. "Need light and warmth. Not going anywhere." As darkness fell, the desert came alive with sounds. Jackals yipped in the distance, and Sam heard the distinctive whooping of hyenas perhaps a mile away. Serenity's head snapped toward each sound, her body tensing. She knew what Sam knew, her injured cub's cries, weak as they were, would draw every opportunist in 5 miles. Sam rigged battery-powered LED lights around the crevice, creating a pool of artificial daylight. Cooper lifted his head briefly, blinking in the brightness, then returned to his vigil. The old dog had shifted to lying on his side, his entire head and neck disappearing into the widened opening. Sam could hear him still humming to the cub, though the sound was weaker now, interrupted by Cooper's irregular heartbeat. The pulley system came next, using skills that his hands remembered better than his mind. Sam constructed a simple but effective rig. The main challenge was the angle. The crevice didn't drop straight down, but curved slightly, meaning any extraction would require careful navigation. He tested it with a water bottle first, lowering it successfully to the cub's level. The second attempt carried a small piece of ham from his sandwich, soaked in water. He heard the cub's desperate eating, Cooper encouraging with soft woofs. By 10 o'clock, Serenity had begun something extraordinary. She was calling, not roaring, but making a series of low, repetitive sounds that seemed designed not to threaten, but to comfort. Cooper responded each time, his tail thumping weakly against the ground. The cub below tried to answer but could barely manage a whisper. This triangulated conversation continued for an hour, predator and prey speaking a common language of maternal care. Sam used the time to modify Cooper's old rescue harness, cutting it down to what he estimated would fit a 3-month-old cub. The work kept his hands busy while his mind wrestled with the implications of what he was doing. Every conservation principle he'd been taught said this was wrong. Wild animals should remain wild. Human intervention should be minimal. Emotional attachment was dangerous for both species. But those principles had been written in comfortable offices by people who'd never held a dying wife's hand, or watched a dog grieve for its lost puppy, or carried the guilt of a pregnant lioness for 40 years. Midnight came with a desert wind that made the fire dance. Sam had managed to lower more water, and the cub seemed stronger for it. But extraction remained impossible without Cooper's help. The dog would need to guide the modified harness onto the cub, and in his current state, Sam wasn't sure Cooper had the strength. He tried to coax Cooper away from the crevice, to eat something, take his medicine. The dog refused, actually growling when Sam tried to physically move him. It was the first time in 14 years Cooper had shown any aggression toward him. The message was clear, the cub came first. Day 2 dawned with Serenity only 30 yards away. Sometime during the night, she'd killed a rabbit. Sam found the remains near his tent but hadn't eaten it. Instead, she'd left it positioned between herself and the crevice. An offering or a statement, he couldn't tell which. Cooper had made it through the night, though his breathing was worse. A wet rattling that spoke of fluid in the lungs. Sam worked through the morning on widening the crevice opening, using a small handsaw and infinite patience. He cut through roots that had held these rocks for decades. Every few minutes, he'd stop, lower water, check on both Cooper and the increasingly agitated lioness. She paced now, back and forth in a 20-yard arc, favoring her injured shoulder but never taking her eyes off the operation. It was just past noon when Marcus Thompson arrived. And everything went to hell. The sound of the approaching jeep sent Serenity fleeing to the ridge, though she stopped at 200 yards, watching. Cooper tried to rise, managed only to lift his head in warning. Sam stood slowly, hands visible, as Marcus got out with his hand on his service weapon. Sam, what the fuck are you doing? Marcus was 35, built like his father had been solid, reliable, uncompromising when it came to regulations. His uniform was crisp despite the heat, his expression caught between official displeasure and personal concern. There's a cub. I can see that. Jesus Christ. Sam, do you have any idea what you've done? We've got protocols. You've contaminated the scene, created human dependency, potentially exposed yourself to attack. That lioness could come back any second. She's been here all night. She's injured. Can't save the cub herself. Marcus removed his hat, ran a hand through sweat-damp hair. The town council met last night. Emergency session. They're voting tomorrow on demanding the program's termination. If they find out about this, an American retiree playing Steve Irwin with protected animals, it's over. Every lion will be destroyed or relocated. Then they don't find out. Sam, I have to report this. It's my job. Your father would have helped. It was a low blow, and Sam knew it. Marcus's father, Tom Thompson, had been Sam's partner for 15 years. The kind of ranger who'd bend every rule to save an animal. Who'd taught his son that sometimes the badge meant protecting wildlife from bureaucracy as much as from poachers. Marcus stood there for a long moment, watching Cooper's desperate vigil, the obvious devotion of a dog to a creature that should have been prey. You have 24 hours. If that cub isn't free, and that lioness isn't back with it by tomorrow noon, I call it in. And Sam, if anyone else sees this, If there's any incident, any attack, I'll arrest you myself." "Fair enough." Marcus turned to leave, then stopped. "The mother, is she the one from the ceremony 27? "Yeah. Eleanor's lioness. She talked about that release for weeks, said it was like watching something broken get a second chance." After Marcus left, Cooper finally collapsed completely. Not dramatically, just a slow sliding from lying to sprawled, his breathing becoming increasingly labored. Sam abandoned the crevice work, cradling the old dog's head, feeling the erratic heartbeat against his palm. "Not yet. Coop, please. We're not done." Cooper's eyes opened, focused with effort on Sam's face, then toward the crevice. His tail moved once, twice. The ghost of a wag. Sam understood. He helped Cooper back to the opening, supporting his weight as the dog resumed his position. Within minutes, the maternal humming began again, weaker but unmistakable. Serenity had crept back during Marcus's visit, now only 25 yards away. As the afternoon wore on, she did something that defied every wildlife behavior manual Sam had ever read. She began to mirror Cooper's sounds, not exactly, but in rhythm, in tone, mother and dog creating a stereo lullaby for the trapped cub. By evening of the second day, Sam had widened the opening enough that he could see the cub clearly. The wire had cut deep, infection setting in despite the water and bits of food. Little Thunder. Sam had started thinking of him by that name, for the weak rumbling sounds he made was fighting. But time was running out. The deadline Marcus had set felt like a noose tightening with each passing hour. Cooper refused all food, accepting only water that Sam basically forced into his mouth. The heart medication sat untouched. The old dog had made his choice. Every ounce of energy went to maintaining his vigil, keeping the cub calm, being the bridge between human help and animal trust. As the second night fell, Sam built his fire larger, the flames casting dancing shadows on the limestone walls. He found himself talking to Cooper, to the cub, to Serenity, maybe to Eleanor. "She would have loved this," he said, poking at the fire with a stick. "The absolute insanity of it. Old man, older dog, trying to save a lion. She would have said it was God's way of making things right. Full circle, she'd call it." Serenity had settled into a sphinx position, close enough now that the firelight reflected in her eyes. She watched Sam with an intensity that went beyond animal wariness. It was evaluation, judgment, maybe even understanding. He wondered if she could smell the guilt on him, 40 years of carrying her mother's death like a stone in his chest. That night, Sam dreamed of Eleanor. Not the cancer-ravaged Eleanor of the last months, but the vibrant woman who'd dragged him to wildlife fundraisers, who'd spent their retirement savings on donations to conservation groups, who'd stood at that lion release ceremony with tears of joy on her face. In the dream, she was sitting beside the crevice, Cooper's head in her lap, humming the hymn she'd loved, Amazing Grace. Bainmain, the cub had climbed out somehow, was curled against Cooper's side, and Serenity lay nearby, at peace. "Some circles have to close. Sam," Dream Eleanor said. "Some debts get paid in unexpected ways." He woke to find Cooper had somehow managed to climb partially into the crevice, not fell deliberately climbed. The old dog had wedged himself down far enough that his front paws could reach the cub. Sam grabbed the flashlight, heart pounding, expecting to find Cooper stuck or injured. Instead, he saw something that made him stop breathing. Cooper was grooming the cub, slowly, carefully, his tongue cleaning the infected wound, the cub allowing it, trusting completely. Serenity stood directly behind Sam. When had she moved that close, watching over his shoulder? For a moment, predator and prey, wild and domestic, human and animal, occupied the same space without fear. The sun was rising on day 3, Marcus's deadline approaching, and somehow, impossibly, they'd become something like a family gathered around a sick child's bed. Sam knew what had to happen next. The final push, the last chance. Cooper was fading. He could see it in the clouded eyes, hear it in the labored breathing. The cub was stronger thanks to the water and care. but still trapped, still dying slowly. And Serenity, magnificent in her patient vigil, was running out of time to save her last baby. "Okay," Sam said aloud, to all of them. "One more try. Together." The morning sun painted the limestone walls gold as Sam prepared for the final rescue attempt. Cooper managed to extract himself from the crevice, though the effort left him gasping. Serenity maintained her position, so close Sam could smell her wild scent, feel the heat from her body. The triangle they'd formed, man, dog, and lioness around one trapped cub, had become something sacred, something that transcended species and spoke to older truths about compassion and connection. Everything would be decided in the next few hours. Either they'd save Little Thunder, or they'd fail, and with that failure would come consequences none of them could fully imagine. Sam looked at Cooper, who despite everything managed to wag his tail once, that golden retriever optimism undiminished even at the edge of exhaustion. "Let's bring him home," Sam said, and began the final descent. The noon sun hammered down mercilessly as Sam made his final preparations. He'd spent the morning modifying Cooper's old search and rescue harness, cutting it down to fit a creature it was never designed for. The yellow fabric, faded from years of service, still bore the patches from Cooper's working days K9 SAR Unit 7 California Forest Service. Sam's hands shook slightly as he attached the harness to the pulley system, not from age, but from the weight of what came next. Cooper lay beside the crevice opening, his breathing shallow and rapid. The old dog hadn't moved in an hour except to occasionally lift his head and make those soft, encouraging sounds down to the cub. Sam could hear the fluid in Cooper's lungs now, a wet crackling with each breath. The heart murmur had become visible in a regular flutter beneath the golden fur of his chest. "One more job, boy," Sam whispered, kneeling beside his companion. "Just guide it on to him. You've done harder things." Cooper's tail moved once in acknowledgement, but his eyes remained fixed on the darkness below where Little Thunder waited. The cub had grown stronger with the water and bits of food, but the infection from the wire was spreading. Red streaks ran up the small leg, and the smell of sepsis was beginning to rise from the crevice. Serenity had positioned herself 20 feet away, lying in the shade of a stunted acacia tree. Her eyes never left Sam as he lowered the modified harness into the crevice. The plan was simple in concept, nearly impossible in execution. Cooper would need to use his paws and mouth to maneuver the harness onto the cub, something he'd done dozens of times with human victims, but never with a wild animal. Never while this weak. Sam operated the pulley system, lowering the harness inch by careful inch. Cooper rose with visible effort, his front legs trembling as he positioned himself over the opening. The old dog's head disappeared into the darkness, and Sam could hear him working soft wooфs of encouragement, the scrape of paws against stone, the cub's confused mewling. "That's it, Coop. Just like we practiced with the dummies. Loop over the head first." 10 minutes passed. 15. Cooper withdrew twice to catch his breath, his face gray with exhaustion beneath the golden fur. Each time, he returned to the task without Sam asking, driven by something beyond training or command. On the third attempt, Sam heard the click of the harness buckle engaging. "Got it, good boy, Cooper. Good." The charge came without warning. One moment, Serenity was lying in the shade. The next, she was moving. 200 pounds of muscle and maternal fury covering 20 feet in 2 bounds. Sam's ranger training kicked in. Don't run. Don't turn your back. Make yourself large. But his body did something else entirely. Something that came from a deeper place than training. He dropped to his knees. Serenity stopped 10 feet away. So close Sam could see the individual whiskers on her muzzle, count the scars on her injured shoulder, her lips pulled back, revealing canines designed for crushing vertebrae. The growl that emerged seemed to come from the earth itself, a vibration Sam felt in his chest, slowly, never breaking eye contact. Sam removed his hat. His hands moved without conscious thought, laying his rifle on the ground, pushing it away. The gesture was clear submission, surrender, trust. "I know who you are," Sam said, his voice steady despite the marathon his heart was running. "Your mother died in California. Brown female, tag number 1247. January 15th, 1984, 3:47 in the afternoon. 2 shots, both mine. Serenity's head tilted slightly, her growl shifting in pitch. She was pregnant. 3 cubs. You were the only one who survived the emergency cesarean. I've carried that for 40 years. Your mother, she looked at me as she died. Not with hate, with something worse. Disappointment. Cooper had gone absolutely still at the crevice opening, sensing the danger but unable to help. The only sound was the wind through the limestone formations and Sam's steady voice. My wife, Eleanor, she knew. Somehow she knew about you, about this place. She stood at your release ceremony. Sick with cancer, but she stood there and watched you walk free. Said it was like watching a debt get paid. Serenity took 1 step forward. 9 feet now. Close enough that Sam could smell her breath. See the pale gold of her eyes. Her injured shoulder trembled with tension. Eleanor died 3 years ago. Told me to come here, to find peace. I think she knew I'd find you. Knew about, Sam's voice broke slightly, about chances for redemption that come disguised as accidents. The lioness held position for what felt like hours but was probably 30 seconds. Then, impossibly, she sat, not relaxed, every muscle still coiled for action, but no longer actively threatening. Her eyes moved from Sam to Cooper, to the crevice where her cub remained trapped. Sam understood, slowly, carefully. He returned to the pulley system. His hands shook worse now, adrenaline making fine motor control difficult. Cooper managed to check the harness one more time, confirming it was secure, then collapsed beside the opening. His job done. Lifting now, Sam announced, beginning to work the pulley. Slow and steady. The system engaged, taking the cub's weight. For a moment, everything worked perfectly. Then, 15 seconds into the lift, the rope jammed. The makeshift pulley, built from equipment decades old, had caught on something, a root, a rock projection, something. Sam pulled harder. Nothing. The cub was suspended 5 feet below the surface, crying in pain and fear. Cooper tried to rise. Couldn't, his legs failing completely. Serenity stood, began pacing, her agitation increasing with each cry from her baby. There was only one option. Sam grabbed his flashlight, tested the rope's anchor point one more time, then lowered himself partially into the crevice. It was madness, his shoulders barely fit, his 75-year-old body protesting every movement. He could hear Cooper whimpering above, Serenity growling. If she decided to attack now, he was completely defenseless, half buried in limestone and shadow. His fingers found the jam the rope had twisted around a root, creating a knot that wouldn't pass through the pulley. Sam worked at it, aware that every second increased multiple dangers. The cub's weight was cutting off circulation to its injured leg. Cooper's breathing was becoming more labored, and Serenity's patience was running out. The knot came free suddenly, the rope jerking upward. Sam pushed from below while maintaining tension above, a gymnastic feat that would have been hard at 30. Little Thunder rose inch by inch, his cries echoing off the stone walls. 6 feet, 4 feet, 2 feet. That's when Sam heard the sound that turned his blood to ice, multiple footfalls, soft pads on stone. He pulled himself from the crevice to find not 1 lion, but 6. The pride had arrived. 5 adult females, ranging from young to mature, had formed a loose circle around the rescue site. They'd approached in absolute silence, appearing like ghosts from the limestone formations. Serenity stood among them, but separate, her attention still fixed on the crevice where her cub dangled just below the surface. Sam's rifle lay 20 feet away, useless even if he could reach it. Cooper managed to lift his head, taking in the situation with eyes that seemed to apologize for not warning Sam sooner. The old dog's tail made 1 weak thump against the ground, not surrender, but greeting. Time crystallized. Sam could hear his own heartbeat, Cooper's labored breathing, the cub's cries, The soft chuffing of 6 lions processing this unprecedented scene. A human, kneeling by a hole. A dog, clearly dying, refusing to abandon his post. Their pride member's cub, almost free but not quite. In the distance, Sam heard engines. Multiple vehicles. Approaching fast. Marcus had brought the wildlife team early, probably monitoring the situation, moving in for what he assumed would be either a rescue or a recovery. The sound agitated the lions, heads turning toward the threat. Sam made a decision that went against every protocol, every safety regulation, every instinct for self-preservation. He stood slowly, waved his arms toward the approaching vehicles in a clear "stay back" gesture. The message had to be clear enough that Marcus would understand from a distance any approach now would trigger disaster. The vehicles stopped a quarter-mile away. Sam could see figures with binoculars, probably Marcus arguing with his team about intervention, but they held position. For now. Sam returned to the pulley, moving with deliberate slowness. The lions watched, their attention divided between him, the approaching vehicles, and Serenity's increasingly frantic pacing. The cub was so close, one more good pull would bring him to the surface. But that pull required Sam to turn his back on 6 apex predators. Cooper made a sound then, different from his maternal humming. A whine that rose and fell in a pattern Sam recognized. It was the beginning of something Cooper used to do at Eleanor's bedside during her final days, when the pain was too much for medication to handle. The old dog was trying to sing. Sam's throat constricted as he recognized the melody Amazing Grace, Eleanor's favorite hymn, the one she'd hummed to frightened animals at the shelter, sung at their wedding, whispered as she died. Cooper's version was broken, interrupted by his failing lungs, but unmistakable. Without thinking, Sam joined in, his voice rough with emotion and disuse. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. The effect on the lions was immediate and inexplicable. The tension in their bodies shifted, heads tilting with what looked like curiosity. One of the younger females actually lay down, sphinx-like, watching. That saved a wretch like me. Cooper's tail wagged weakly, his contribution fading to just rhythm-panted breaths that somehow maintained the melody's beat. Sam pulled on the rope, smooth and steady now. I once was lost, but now am found. Little Thunder's head emerged from the crevice, eyes blinking in the sudden sunlight. The harness held perfectly, Cooper's expertise evident even in his extremity. One more pull. Was blind, but now I see. The cub came free. Sam caught Little Thunder as he cleared the opening, the small body weighing perhaps 20 pounds, infected, dehydrated, exhausted, but alive, desperately, magnificently alive. The cub's eyes met Sam's for a moment, pale gold like his mother's, holding that same ancient wisdom that predators possess. Sam set Little Thunder on the ground, quickly removing the harness. The cub tried to stand, fell, tried again. The infected leg wouldn't bear weight, but he managed 3 legs, wobbling but determined. Serenity was there instantly, her massive head lowering to her baby, tongue beginning the essential grooming that was medicine, comfort, and claim all at once. Cooper watched from where he lay, his tail making one final wag before his eyes closed. The old dog's breathing was barely visible now, his great heart finally accepting its limits. Sam crawled to him, gathering Cooper's head into his lap, feeling the irregular pulse, the cooling nose. "Good boy," Sam whispered. "Good boy. Job done." The pride had formed a protective circle around Serenity and Little Thunder, but their attention was on Cooper. 6 wild lions, watching a domestic dog die, and in their stillness was something that transcended species recognition of sacrifice, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement that death comes to all hunters, wild and tame alike. Marcus's team remained at their distance, witnesses to something that would never make it into official reports. The sun had moved past its zenith, beginning its descent toward evening, casting long shadows across the limestone valley. In Sam's arms, Cooper opened his eyes one more time, looking not at Sam but at Little Thunder, who was now nursing despite his injuries, the eternal optimism of the young. Cooper's tail moved once more, not a wag, but a gentle sweep, like a benediction. Then stillness. The rescue was complete. Cooper lay still as stone beside the crevice, his golden fur dusty and matted, his great chest barely rising with each struggled breath. Sam knelt beside him, Little Thunder's weight still warm in his arms from the extraction, the cub's infected leg dangling at that terrible angle. The 6 lions maintained their circle, watching with an intensity that made the desert air feel electric, charged with something ancient and unnameable. Sam set Little Thunder down gently on a flat rock, his movements slow and telegraphed for the pride's benefit. The cub mewled weakly, trying to crawl despite the infected leg that wouldn't bear weight. Serenity moved toward her baby, but something in Cooper's stillness made her pause, her great head turning between her cub and the dying dog. Cooper wasn't breathing. The realization hit Sam like a physical blow. One moment, Cooper's chest had been moving. The next, nothing. No rise, no fall. Just the terrible stillness that every emergency responder knew meant time was running out or already gone. No, no, no. Not yet. Coop. Not yet. Sam's hands moved without thought, muscle memory from decades-old training taking over. He positioned Cooper properly, tilted the great head back to open the airway, and began compressions. The feeling of Cooper's ribs beneath his palms, the way the old body moved with each push, it was obscene somehow. This mechanical forcing of life into something so naturally ready to let go. 1, 2, 3, 4. The lions watched. 6 pairs of golden eyes tracking every movement, every compression, every desperate breath Sam forced into Cooper's lungs. They could have attacked. Sam was completely vulnerable, focused entirely on his dog, but they remained still. Even Little Thunder had stopped crying, as if understanding that something larger than his own pain was happening. Come on, Cooper. Don't you dare. Not after all this. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Sam tasted the wild on Cooper's muzzle, the dust and heat and something deeper, the scent of a life fully lived. 30 more compressions. The sun beat down mercilessly, sweat running into Sam's eyes, his own 75-year-old heart protesting the effort. Please, Coop, Eleanor's not ready for you yet. I'm not ready. On the 3rd round of compressions, Sam heard it, a gasp, weak but real. Cooper's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. Then finding Sam's face, the tail moved, just once. The ghost of that golden retriever optimism that had defined him for 14 years. That's it, boy. Stay with me. But Sam could see the truth in those clouded eyes. This wasn't recovery, it was goodbye. Cooper had come back not to live, but to finish what he'd started. The old dog's head turned slightly, looking for something. Sam followed his gaze to where Little Thunder lay on the rock, panting in the heat, his small body trembling with pain and exhaustion. What happened next defied every scientific understanding Sam had of animal behavior. Serenity approached her cub, lowered her massive head, and gently took Little Thunder by the scruff of his neck the way mothers carry their young. But instead of retreating to safety with her baby, she walked toward Cooper, toward the dog who by all rights should have been prey, who represented everything wild lions had learned to fear and avoid. She set Little Thunder against Cooper's chest. The effect was immediate. Cooper's tail wagged again, stronger this time, and his breathing seemed to steady. The cub, feeling the warmth of Cooper's body, instinctively pressed closer, his tiny heartbeat against Cooper's failing one. For a moment, Sam could almost believe in miracles, in the healing power of touch across species, in Eleanor's God who moved through mysterious ways. Cooper's eyes opened fully, more aware than they'd been in hours. He looked at Sam with such clarity, such purpose, that Sam found himself leaning closer to understand. What is it, boy? What do you need? Cooper's paw moved, just slightly. pushing at Sam's hand. Then his head turned, his tongue emerging to gently, so gently, lick Little Thunder's head. Once, twice, the universal gesture of acceptance, of blessing, of love that transcended the boundaries between wild and tame. The cub responded, a tiny rumbling purr that seemed to give Cooper more peace than all of Sam's desperate medical interventions. "I understand," Sam whispered, his voice breaking. "You're saying goodbye." Cooper's eyes found Sam's again, and in them was everything 14 years of companionship. The memory of Eleanor's hand on his head, the purpose that had driven him to this moment. The old dog's paw moved again, this time clearly pushing Sam's hand toward Little Thunder. The message couldn't have been clearer if Cooper had spoken English, "Take care of each other." Sam gathered Cooper's head into his lap, feeling the weight of that noble skull, the softness of the ears he'd scratched thousands of times. Little Thunder remained pressed against Cooper's chest, and Serenity lay down beside them, her body creating a protective wall around this impossible Trinity man, dog, and Lion Cub. "Eleanor's waiting for you," Sam said, his voice steady despite the tears that ran freely down his weathered cheeks. "She's got that garden she always talked about. No fences, coop, no leashes, just endless fields and all the tennis balls you could want." Cooper's tail moved once more, acknowledging the words or perhaps seeing something Sam couldn't. His breathing was slowing now, but peacefully, naturally, like settling into sleep after a long, good day's work. "You saved him, Coop. You did what you were born to do. One more rescue. One more life pulled from the dark." The pride had drawn closer, close enough that Sam could hear their breathing, smell their wild scent mixing with the domestic familiar of his dying dog. One of the younger lionesses made a sound, not a roar or growl, but something softer, almost like the chuffing greeting they used with their own kind. Cooper's ear twitched at the sound, acknowledging even this, even now. "Remember that time at Big Sur," Sam continued, needing to fill the silence with words, with memory. "You found that boy in the collapsed mine shaft, 6 hours you dug. Your paws were bleeding, but you wouldn't stop. The whole team wanted to give up, but you knew. You always knew when there was life to save." Cooper's breathing was barely visible now, just the slightest movement of his ribs. Little Thunder had fallen asleep against him, the exhausted sleep of the young, his infected leg twitching occasionally but his body finally relaxing into safety. The cub's breathing and Cooper's had synchronized, but Cooper's was fading, spacing out, the inevitable rhythm of letting go. "You were Eleanor's dog first," Sam said. "She chose you at that shelter, remember? Picked you out of 30 dogs because you were the only one not barking. Just sitting there, watching, waiting for your person. She was your person, Coop. I was just the lucky guy who got to come along." The sun had moved lower, casting long shadows across the limestone formations. Marcus's team remained at their distance, witnesses to something that would never fit in their reports, their forms still as statues against the horizon. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath, even the eternal wind stilling. Cooper's eyes found Sam's one last time. In them was no pain, no fear, just that steady love that had defined him, the love that had survived Eleanor's death, that had brought him to this moment, that had bridged the impossible gap between predator and prey. His paw moved once more, just a twitch really, touching Sam's hand where it rested on Little Thunder's small body. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry 14 years of faithful service, Cooper let go. The stillness that followed was absolute. Not the temporary stillness of his earlier crisis, but the profound quiet of completion. Sam sat there, Cooper's head still in his lap, Little Thunder still pressed against the great chest that would never rise again. The tears came freely now, the kind of grief that was too large for his body to contain. That's when Serenity did something that would haunt Sam for the rest of his days. She rose, approached Cooper's still form, and gently, deliberately, placed her paw on Cooper's side. Not possessively, not aggressively, but with what Sam could only interpret as respect. One hunter to another, one parent to another, one mortal creature acknowledging another's passage. The other lions remained still, their heads lowered in a posture Sam had only seen when they rested. But there was something different about it now. An attention, an awareness that death had walked among them and taken not prey but something else, a friend, perhaps, or at least a respected adversary who had proved himself worthy of their witness. Little Thunder stirred against Cooper's cooling body, mewing softly. Serenity picked him up again, so gently for such a powerful creature. But she didn't immediately retreat. Instead, she stood there, her cub in her jaws, looking at Sam, waiting. Sam understood. Slowly, his joints protesting after so long on the ground. He stood. He lifted Cooper's body, all 80 pounds of him, though it felt heavier now, weighted with finality. The old dog's head lolled against Sam's chest, and Sam could feel the absence of heartbeat, the terrible stillness where there had always been warm, living response. The pride parted as Sam walked through them, carrying Cooper toward his truck. They followed at a respectful distance, not stalking, not threatening, but accompanying. 6 wild lions serving as an honor guard for a domestic dog who had given his last breath to save one of their own. As Sam laid Cooper gently in the truck bed, arranging him as if comfort still mattered, Serenity approached one more time. She set Little Thunder down and looked at Sam with those ancient golden eyes. Then she did something Sam had never seen in 40 years of working with wildlife. She vocalized directly to him. Not a roar or a growl, but a deep, resonant sound that vibrated in his chest and seemed to carry meaning beyond language. Marcus would say later he was anthropomorphizing, projecting human emotion onto animal behavior. The wildlife team would write it up as stress response, coincidence, misinterpretation. But Sam knew what he heard in that sound. It was thank you. It was goodbye. It was the acknowledgement of a debt that could never quite be repaid. Serenity picked up Little Thunder again and walked away, her pride falling into formation around her. They didn't run or slink, but walked with dignity back toward the rocky heights where they belonged. Little Thunder, drowsy with milk and medicine from the emergency kit Sam had managed to apply, looked back once from his mother's jaws, too young to understand death, but old enough to know that something important had happened, that the strange golden creature who had sung to him in the darkness was worthy of remembering. Sam stood beside his truck, one hand on Cooper's still form, watching until the lions disappeared into the landscape. The sun was setting properly now, painting the world in shades of gold that reminded him of Cooper's fur in better days. Marcus's Jeep approached slowly, respectfully. The younger man got out, looked at Cooper's body, then at Sam's tear-stained face. "I'm sorry, Sam. He was something special." "He was everything," Sam said simply. They stood there in silence, 2 men and 1 dead dog, while the desert resumed its ancient rhythms around them. Somewhere in the distance, a lion roared not Serenity, but one of the others, calling to the approaching night. The sound echoed off the limestone cliffs and seemed to carry with it all the grief and glory of the wild, the terrible beauty of a world where death and life walked hand in hand, where love could bloom between species, where an old dog could spend his last heartbeat saving something that should have been his enemy. Cooper had done his final job. The rescue was complete. Marcus drove slowly, following Sam's truck through the darkening desert toward the farmhouse. The younger ranger had offered to drive Sam home, worried about the old man's state of mind. But Sam had refused. He needed these final minutes with Cooper, needed to be the one to bring him home, even if home would never be the same again. The farmhouse sat in purple twilight when they arrived, its windows dark, no longer the warm beacon Eleanor had made it. Sam backed the truck carefully to the garden shed where he kept his tools, unable to face the thought of Cooper's body spending the night in the vehicle. Marcus helped him carry Cooper inside, laying him on the old quilt Eleanor had used for sick animals at the shelter. The golden retriever looked peaceful, as if sleeping, his noble head resting on his paws in the position he'd taken thousands of times by the fireplace. It was while adjusting Cooper's collar, wanting him to look dignified even in death, that Sam felt it something stiff beneath the worn leather. His fingers found a small pocket he'd never noticed before, sewn with Eleanor's precise stitches. Inside was a plastic-wrapped envelope, no bigger than a playing card. "What's that?" Marcus asked, setting down the shovel he'd fetched for tomorrow's burial. Sam's hands trembled as he opened it. Eleanor's handwriting, still clear despite 3 years in hiding. The date at the top stopped his heart 2 weeks before she died, when she could barely hold a pen, when every word cost her pain. "My dearest Sam," he read aloud, his voice catching. "If you're reading this, then Cooper has done what I asked of him. He's brought you to where you needed to be." Marcus moved closer, reading over Sam's shoulder as the letter continued. "I know about California, my love. I've always known. Tom Thompson told me years ago, after too much wine at that Forest Service reunion. The pregnant lioness, the guilt you've carried like stones in your pockets. You think you hid it well, but I knew you. Samuel Hawthorne. I saw it in your eyes every time we passed the zoo's lion exhibit. Felt it in the way you tensed at wildlife documentaries." Sam had to stop, his throat closing. Marcus took the letter gently, continuing in his steady voice. "When I was diagnosed, something strange happened. I stopped being afraid of dying and started being afraid of leaving you alone with that guilt. So I did what you would call meddling and I call love. I researched that lioness's cubs. One survived a female, raised at San Diego Wildlife Park. When Spain announced their reintroduction program, she was selected." Poetic. "Isn't it? Your ghost, given a second chance at freedom." "Jesus," Marcus whispered. She knew. Sam took the letter back, needing to read Eleanor's words himself. "I didn't just attend that release ceremony. Sam, I funded it. That inheritance from Aunt Margaret you thought went to medical bills, I gave half to the conservation program, specifically earmarked for Lioness 27. I named her Serenity in the adoption papers, my prayer for your peace. I even convinced them to release her in the territory visible from the old walking trails near Castro Valley, where you'd walk, where Cooper would lead you." The room spun slightly. Sam sat down hard on a wooden crate, the letter shaking in his hands. "Cooper knows those trails, Sam. For the last month before I died, while you were at the market or running errands, I trained him. Not with commands, but with love, with treats, with the promise that one day he'd help you the way he couldn't help me. I showed him the lions from a distance, taught him not to fear them, told him they were friends who needed watching. You always said Cooper understood English well. He understood enough." Sam remembered now Eleanor's insistence on Cooper walking even when she could barely stand. Her mysterious disappearances with the dog when Sam was gone. He'd thought it was her way of maintaining normalcy, fighting the cancer's progression. But she'd been planning this, orchestrating redemption from her deathbed. The morning walks weren't random. My stubborn love. Cooper was checking on Serenity. He was keeping my promise to watch over her, and if something happened when something happened, because life is nothing but chances to help or turn away, he would bring you there. To face your ghost, to save what could be saved. To learn what I learned in my last days, love doesn't erase mistakes. It transforms them into purpose. Marcus had sat down too, his official composure cracking. This is impossible." But Sam continued reading. "I know you'll think this is manipulation, and maybe it is, but I prefer to think of it as my final gift. You gave me 43 years of love, Sam. You held my hand through the cancer, read to me when I couldn't see through the pain, carried me when I couldn't walk. Let me give you this, the chance to save instead of take, to heal instead of wound, to close a circle that's been choking you for 40 years. The letter's final paragraph was written in a different pen, shakier handwriting her last days, when holding anything was agony. Cooper will know when it's time. Trust him. Trust the plan. Trust that some things are bigger than coincidence. That sanctuary you've been afraid to find, it's not in isolation. Sam, it's in connection. It's in facing the very thing you've been running from. The conservation program needs volunteers, defenders, voices of experience. Be that voice. Let my death lead to life, the way that Lioness's death led to Serenity's life. Circles, my love. Everything is circles. P.S. I've left $50,000 in a separate account for the wildlife program. The papers are in my jewelry box, beneath Mom's pearls. Use it wisely. Make me proud. I love you beyond words, beyond death, beyond understanding. E. Sam set the letter down, his hand steady now despite the tears running down his face. The farmhouse was silent, except for the ticking of Eleanor's grandmother clock, still keeping time 3 years after her death. She orchestrated all of this, Marcus said finally. The route, the timing, even Cooper's response. That's why he wouldn't leave the cub. He was completing her mission. Sam nodded, unable to speak. He walked to Eleanor's jewelry box, untouched since her death. Beneath her mother's pearls, wrapped in tissue paper, were the documents, bank statements, donation forms, even a letter of intent for the conservation program with Sam's name already listed as potential volunteer coordinator. Sam, Marcus said carefully, what happened today, the illegal intervention, the unauthorized rescue, I can make it disappear. Listed as natural recovery. Mother retrieved cub without human interference. But if you do this, if you join the program officially, you'll have to follow protocols. Protocols didn't save that cub. No, Cooper did. And Eleanor, apparently. Sam looked at Cooper's still form, then at the letter in his hands. Eleanor had been right, as she usually was. The guilt hadn't disappeared, might never fully disappear, but it had transformed into something else. Purpose, direction, a reason to engage with the world instead of hiding from it. The town meeting, Sam said suddenly, about shutting down the program. When is it? Tomorrow evening. They'll vote on whether to demand the lion's removal. I want to speak. Marcus studied him. You sure they won't be friendly? A 75-year-old American telling them to keep the lions that killed their sheep. I'm not going to tell them anything. I'm going to show them. Sam pulled out his phone, showing Marcus the video he'd managed to take Cooper and Little Thunder, predator and prey united in survival. And I'm going to tell them about circles, about second chances, about how Eleanor's death saved a lion cub 20 years in the future. That's quite a story. It's not a story. It's the truth. The messy, impossible, miraculous truth. Sam stood, feeling something shift in his chest. Not the easing of guilt, but the acceptance of it, integrated now into something larger. Eleanor had known him better than he knew himself, had loved him enough to plan his salvation even as she faced her own ending. Help me bury him tomorrow, Sam asked Marcus. In the morning, before the meeting, next to Eleanor's roses. She'd want him there. Of course. As Marcus prepared to leave, he turned back. Your wife, she was something special too. She was everything, Sam said, unconsciously echoing his earlier words about Cooper, then softer. They both were. Alone in the farmhouse, Sam sat with Cooper's body, Eleanor's letter in his hands. The transformation she'd orchestrated was complete. Tomorrow he would bury his dog, speak at the town meeting, begin his work with the conservation program. He would use Eleanor's money to build something lasting: education programs, coexistence strategies, ways for humans and predators to share the landscape without fear. The guilt would remain, woven now into the fabric of purpose. The pregnant lioness from 1984 was still dead, but her descendant lived free because Sam and Cooper had intervened. Eleanor was still gone, but her love continued to work through the plans she'd made, the connections she'd fostered, the healing she'd initiated even as her own body failed. Circles within circles, each loss becoming a gift, each ending opening to a beginning. Cooper had known, somehow, that his death would complete something larger than a rescue. He'd held on just long enough to deliver Eleanor's final message: redemption isn't found in isolation but in connection, not in forgetting, but in transforming memory into action. Outside, somewhere in the darkness, Sam heard the distant roar of lions. Not threatening now, but simply present. Part of the landscape Eleanor had chosen for their final chapter. He raised his hand in a slight wave, knowing they couldn't see him, knowing it didn't matter. The circle was closing. The debt was being paid. And somehow, impossibly, love was the currency that made it all work. The limestone valley wore spring's green veil when Sam returned, 1 year to the day after Cooper's death. Marcus walked beside him, both men moving slowly through the morning coolness, carrying their separate burdens. Sam held a ceramic urn containing Cooper's ashes and a framed photo of Eleanor from their 40th anniversary. Marcus carried a camera and the official conservation program documentation that would mark this site as significant not on any public map, but in the quiet records of moments when the wild and civilized worlds touched. The crevice had been filled in by winter rains and wind-blown sand, leaving only a shallow depression where Little Thunder had nearly died. Sam stood at the spot, remembering Cooper's vigil, the impossible geometry of dog and lion and human arranged around this narrow opening to darkness. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked gently. "We could do it at the farmhouse, in Eleanor's garden?" "No, this is where he chose to spend his last strength. This is where the circle closes." Sam had changed in the year since. Still 76 and weathered, but no longer hollowed out by grief. His work with the conservation program had given him purpose 3 nights a week, teaching coexistence strategies to local farmers. Weekend programs bringing school children to observe the lions from safe distances, documenting behaviors that challenged traditional assumptions about predator-prey relationships. The town meeting had been the turning point. Sam had stood before 200 angry farmers and shown them the video Cooper saving Little Thunder, Serenity's trust. The pride's respectful witness to Cooper's death. He'd told them Eleanor's story, about circles and second chances, about debts that could only be paid forward. The vote had been close, 52% to 48, but the lions stayed. Now, Sam knelt at the filled crevice, setting down the urn and photo. He'd planned to be alone for this, but Marcus had insisted on coming. "Cooper saved one of our lions," he'd said. "That makes him family." Sam opened the urn. Cooper's ashes finer than he'd expected, lighter, as if even in death the old dog had found a way to be less burden. He was about to begin spreading them when Marcus grabbed his arm. "Sam, look!" From the eastern ridge, exactly where Serenity had first appeared, shapes emerged from the morning shadows. Sam's breath caught. It was her Serenity, still magnificent despite the permanent limp, leading her small pride down the familiar path. But it was the adolescent lion beside her that made Sam's eyes blur with tears. Little Thunder had survived and thrived, nearly adult now, his mane beginning to show. He walked with the slight irregularity that marked his injured leg, but walked nonetheless. The wire's damage had left its mark, but like his mother's gunshot wound, he'd adapted, overcome, lived. The pride stopped 50 yards away, maintaining the safe distance that had become their understood boundary. All except Little Thunder. The young lion continued forward, stopping at 20 yards, closer than any wild lion should come to humans, his golden eyes so like his mother's, like his grandmother's from that day in 1984, studied Sam with an intelligence that transcended species. Sam knew he should stand still, avoid eye contact, follow every protocol he now taught others. Instead, he did something that would have horrified any wildlife expert. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stick, a piece of olive wood from Eleanor's favorite tree. He held it up, showing it to Little Thunder, then tossed it gently to the side, away from both human and lion. The young lion's head tilted, watching the stick arc through the air and land in the sandy soil. For a long moment, nothing moved except the morning wind through the acacias. Then Little Thunder walked to the stick, picked it up in his mouth with surprising gentleness, and walked back toward Sam. He dropped it 15 feet away, then retreated to his original position. "Mother of God," Marcus whispered. He's playing fetch. Sam threw the stick again, farther this time. Little Thunder retrieved it, brought it closer, 12 feet now. On the third throw, the young lion brought it to within 8 feet before setting it down and backing away. Not submission, not domestication, but recognition. Memory, the honoring of a debt between species. Cooper taught him, Sam said, his voice thick. In those hours by the crevice, somehow Cooper taught him this. Serenity watched her son's unprecedented behavior without interfering. The other lions remained still, witnesses again to something that challenged every understanding of wild behavior. When Sam didn't throw the stick a fourth time, Little Thunder seemed to understand the game was over. He turned back toward his pride, but stopped once more, facing Sam. The sound that emerged from the young lion's throat wasn't quite a roar. He wasn't fully mature yet, but it was powerful nonetheless. It rolled across the valley like distant thunder, the sound that had given him his name in Sam's mind. Not threatening, not warning, but acknowledgement, greeting, perhaps even gratitude. Sam opened Cooper's urn then, letting the wind take the ashes, watching them spiral and dance in the morning light. Some settled on the filled crevice. Some caught the breeze toward the ridge where the lions waited. Some rose high enough that Sam lost sight of them against the brightening sky. "You did it, boy," Sam said quietly. "You saved him, gave him the chance to grow up, to lead his own pride someday, to continue the line that should have ended in California 40 years ago." Eleanor was right. Circles within circles. He placed Eleanor's photo against a rock, weighing it down with stones. The image would fade, weather, eventually disappear. But for now she smiled at the spot where love had transcended species, where her posthumous plan had found its completion. The pride was moving away now, Little Thunder rejoining them with his distinctive limping gait that somehow made him more magnificent, not less. Before they disappeared over the ridge, Serenity turned back once, her gaze finding Sam's across the distance. Then she was gone, her family with her, returned to the vast territory where they lived free, because enough people had chosen coexistence over fear. 3 hours later, Sam stood in the community center, 23 children aged 8 to 12 sitting in a semicircle around him. Their teacher had brought them for his weekly wildlife education program, and today he'd promised them something special. "Who remembers what we learned about lions last week?" he asked. Hands shot up. "They're apex predators. They live in prides. The females do most of the hunting." All correct. But today I want to tell you about something more important than facts. I want to tell you about connections we don't expect, friendships that shouldn't exist, and love that doesn't end when someone dies. He pulled up the video on the large screen. Marcus had edited it respectfully, showing Cooper's rescue of Little Thunder without the graphic moments of Cooper's death. The children watched in silent amazement as the old golden retriever sang to a trapped lion cub, as Serenity trusted a human and dog with her baby, as two species worked together for life instead of death. "Mr. Sam?" A girl named Isabella raised her hand. "Is the lion cub okay now?" "He's more than okay. He's grown up strong, leads his own section of the pride. And sometimes, when I visit that spot, he remembers. Not me, exactly, but the kindness that saved him." "What happened to Cooper?" a boy asked quietly. Sam had learned to tell this part without breaking. Usually. Cooper was very old and sick. His heart was failing. But he used his last strength to save Little Thunder. He died right after, with the cub safe against his chest. "That's sad," Isabella said. "Yes," Sam agreed. "But it's also beautiful." Cooper lived his whole life saving others, 34 human rescues, countless animals. Saving that lion cub was his last gift. His perfect ending. "My mom says when dogs die, they go to heaven," another child offered. "Maybe they do. Or maybe..." Sam pulled up another photo, this one from last week. Little Thunder, clearly visible on a ridge at sunset. his distinctive profile unmistakable. Maybe they live on in the lives they saved, in the connections they created, in the love that keeps rippling outward like stones thrown in still water. "Did you get another dog?" Isabella asked. Sam smiled, the question no longer painful. "No. Cooper taught me something important. Love doesn't end when someone dies, it just changes shape. Now I have 27 lions to watch over, to protect, to help others understand. That's Cooper's love, transformed. That's my wife Eleanor's love, still working through me. That's how love works, it never really ends. Just keeps changing shape, finding new ways to matter." The children sat quietly, processing this in the way children do, without the need to fill silence with words. Finally, Isabella raised her hand again. "Can we see the lions? The real ones?" "Saturday morning. If your parents agree, we'll go to the observation point. And if we're very lucky, we might see Little Thunder. You'll know him by his walk. He limps a little from his injury, but he's the strongest young lion in the pride. Because Cooper saved him. Because Cooper showed him that strength isn't about being perfect. It's about surviving, adapting, and remembering the kindness that helped you when you couldn't help yourself." As the children filed out, chattering excitedly about Saturday's trip, Sam stood by the window, looking toward the distant hills where the lions roamed. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, he could hear Little Thunder's roar carrying on the wind, not quite mature yet, still sounding like distant thunder. Each time, Sam raised his coffee cup in salute, a ritual that would have seemed insane 2 years ago but now felt as natural as breathing. Cooper was gone. Eleanor was gone. The pregnant lioness from 1984 was gone. But their legacy lived on in Little Thunder's proud limp, in Serenity's continued trust, in 23 children who would grow up understanding that the lines between wild and tame, predator and prey, human and animal were never as solid as they seemed. Love didn't end. It just changed shape, found new vessels, kept flowing forward like water finding its way to the sea. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it came back to you in the form of a young lion playing fetch with a stick, honoring a debt that transcended death itself. The circle was complete. But like all circles, it had no ending, only the promise of continuation. Revolution after revolution, each turn carrying the memory of all that came before. I've told you this story not because I want you to believe in miracles or fate, but because I need you to understand something I learned too late. Family isn't just blood, and gratitude isn't just saying thank you. Cooper wasn't just a dog, and Serenity wasn't just a lion. They became family in the only way that matters, through choosing to care when they didn't have to. Eleanor knew this. That's why she orchestrated everything from her deathbed, understanding that Sam's salvation wouldn't come from forgetting his guilt, but from transforming it into purpose. You see, gratitude isn't a feeling, it's an action. Little Thunder playing fetch a year later wasn't about training or domestication. It was gratitude made visible. A wild creature choosing to remember kindness. Every time Sam raises his coffee cup to that distant roar, he's practicing gratitude too, not for what he has, but for what was given and taken away. We think family means sharing genes, but Cooper proved otherwise, dying with a predator's baby against his chest. We think gratitude means being thankful for good things, but sometimes it means being thankful for the chances to make things right, even when those chances come wrapped in loss. That's what I needed you to know.